American psychologist William James said that our normal waking consciousness is but one special type of consciousness, whilst all about it, parted from it by the filmiest of screens, there lie potential forms of consciousness entirely different. No account of the universe in its totality can be final, which leaves these other forms of consciousness quite disregarded. At any rate, the existence of these states forbid a premature closing of our accounts with reality. And that's one of the ideas that really got Michael Pollan set on pursuing this book and the research that led to this book. Michael Pollan goes over the history of research into psychedelics, and he talks about his own experiences recently trying these because he didn't grow up using them. He didn't hit that. He was sort of in a generational gap that missed a lot of the psychedelics that were so popular in the 60s. And so he does use some of them and has experience with them, and then talks about them in the book for the purpose of the book. Then he talks about the current renaissance in research into psychedelics that is taking place right now that the stigma has lifted somewhat on them. After that, he sort of summarizes those parts, his personal experience, the psychedelic research, and how that's being used to treat depression, anxiety, and mostly other mental illness issues such as addiction. And then he summarizes nicely talking about sort of the bigger philosophical picture. And a lot of people, this book didn't change my mind about Michael Pollan. I think that the first book of his that I read was Botany of Desire, and he doesn't consider himself a food writer, even though many people have pigeonholed him as that, because his last books, I think his last 4 or 5 books have been about food. Cooked, Food Rules, In Defense of Food, and The Omnivore's Dilemma all really focus a lot on food, but he's described himself as a nature writer, and that's really obvious in The Botany of Desire, where he explores the perspective of, he creates a thought experiment exploring the perspective of a plant's eye view of the world and trying to imagine the ways that we are servants of plants. And he describes several types of plants, not all of them foods. He includes tulips and cannabis as 2 of the plants that have really influenced human desires. And that book was amazing. And he says that his focus is on nature-human interactions, and he's really interested in the visceral interactions between humans and nature. And eating of food happens to be one of the most visceral ways that we connect with plants and animals. And so I think he was getting away from this idea of nature is something separate from humans. And in this book, he continues in that vein because eating psychedelics is another way that humans connect viscerally with nature, and they have done so for thousands of years, and he covers that in this book. I personally was really excited as soon as I found out that Michael Pollan was writing this book. I went on Amazon, and even though it was on pre-order, I paid for it, and then I also got it on Audible and started listening to it right away. And it came at a good time for me because it was sort of like a transition moment in my life with a lot of different things going on. And this book's really good for that kind of moment in life because it will help you make meaning out of your situation. And the way that he writes is very entertaining and enjoyable to read. And the message is a very powerful one. And I think this book, that's how I used the book. I listened to it while I was working, while I was driving, and I listened to it at a time where I was going through a difficult transition in my life, so it's been really useful in that way. And it would also be really good for people who have someone that they know or someone that they're related to or someone that they love who is going through difficult times or like a major life transition. If someone that you know is diagnosed with terminal illness, or someone in your family recently died, like one of your parents, this would be a great book to read at that time of life, because that's actually one of the things that he's going through in this book. And he draws on his personal experience with his dad's death and also a major transition in his family life that and also an age transition. He's going through an age transition that felt like he was searching for more meaning. So if any of those things are happening to you, then this would be a great book. Or if you know anyone that's dealing with some of the stuff that psychedelics are being tested on helping, such as depression, addiction, anxiety, obsession, and being stuck in mental ruts, those are all things that the research on therapeutic uses of psychedelics are focusing on, all those things. And those are the things that it seems like the psychedelics are most useful for helping. And one analogy or metaphor that's used quite often in this book is the metaphor of snow. So all of us, even if you haven't been sledding or skiing, you can imagine that on a slope that's covered in snow. There's other ways to imagine this too, but this is a useful one. On a slope that's covered with snow, the first person that goes down, or the first time that a person goes down on skis, that leaves some ruts in the snow. And then more and more people go down, and there start to be these built-in paths. You could also, people walking through snow would be similar. And after time, it becomes harder and harder not to go down the same path that's already been created in the snow. This metaphor has been used before to describe the neural pathways in the brain, so this use in reference to psychedelics is not completely novel. So the metaphor used in the book is of a snow globe. So with psychedelics, it's like shaking up the snow globe and erasing, or a blizzard coming through and erasing all of those ruts and making it easier to start new routines and new pathways. So that's, I think, a very useful metaphor from the book. Just to clarify a little bit, if you don't know what psychedelics are, psychedelics is a term associated a lot with the 60s and the counterculture, but that was originally developed in more of a technical, it was more of a technical term when it was first developed, and usually considered in that category are plant medicines like ayahuasca, mescaline, and peyote, from which mescaline is derived, psilocybin from magic mushrooms, and LSD. Those are the main ones considered. I think I always like to offer sort of some ideas about what to pair this book with. So I think a really good pairing would be to, right before reading this book, to read or listen to The Ego Tunnel by Thomas Metzinger, which is a really great book, a cognitive science book. He's actually a philosopher, and the book is really great description of what the ego is, because Michael Pollan talks a lot about the ego in this book, and I think a lot of people don't really understand what that means, or there's a lot of different connotations for that word. So reading The Ego Tunnel before reading this book would be really great. And then after reading this book, reading The Snow Leopard by Peter Matheson, or reading the two at the same time. So Snow Leopard is nonfiction also, but it's more of a travel account of Peter Matheson's trip in the Himalayas, and it has a lot of spiritual elements too, so very beautiful read. And if you listen to it on audio, it's read by the author, Peter Matheson, at a transitional moment in his life, and it talks a lot about death and stuff like that, and transcendence. And so not an extremely spiritual book. None of these books that I'm proposing are very spiritual, and they fall really well in line with Michael Pollan's approach, which he has always been a strict materialist. So I really like reading something from someone like that who's tackling something that is sort of outside of their comfort zone, and instead of someone who's already drank the Kool-Aid explaining it, or you can tell when someone is exercising critical thinking, and Michael Pollan does a great job of that. So I definitely recommend this book. Either on Audible, it's read by the author. I'm super glad Michael Pollan did that, because that usually makes a better read. It's on Audible, and it's also available in hardback right now. So definitely recommend the book. And I'm going to end with a quote that's also from the book by the Czech psychotherapist Stanislav Grof, who developed a lot of psychotherapy techniques using psychedelics, and he's also the developer of holotropic breath work, which he developed after a lot of the psychedelics were banned in the US, and it's another way to achieve similar states of consciousness. So here's his quote: "Psychedelics used responsibly and with proper caution would be for psychiatry what the microscope is for biology and medicine, or the telescope is for astronomy." So I'll let you just sit with that quote for a little bit. Definitely recommend the book. Go out and get it. It's